Welcome to I Do What I Do, where we explore how and why folks do what they do to forge their path and create fulfilling, squiggly careers. I'm Zara Bartels, once a dancer, now a creative operator. And in this first season, we're in London, once my home for many years. So whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur, a creative soul, or just curious about what makes people tick, have a listen. You'll be inspired to do what you do better. Let's go. Good afternoon, Eric Collins. Thank you for joining me on I Do What I Do.
Good afternoon. It's good seeing you. Whenever I hear someone say good afternoon, it reminds me of my family from the Caribbean.
I'm a Caribbean girl.
Oh, there you go.
It's so funny you say that because I was just home in Trinidad, and the thing for me was I miss how much people say morning, afternoon when you walk into a building, when you're walking down the street, and then I came back and I was like, no one's saying good morning.
No.
But yes, so good afternoon. So Eric Collins, I have to look at my notes because so much, you've done so much. So, CEO, co-founder of Impact X Capital, also, which is a VC fund that focuses on underrepresented founders and building those businesses and supporting those communities. You're an entrepreneur. You are a TV presenter of Channel 4's The Moneymaker, and also author of amazing, very helpful. Anyone who's a small business owner should read this, particularly if you're from an underrepresented background. We don't need permission. You're living the dream of so many people. You were also appointed to and I have to read this as well, the Small Business Administration Council on Underserved Communities by President Obama.
Correct, yeah.
And you're also middle child, second son of a Southern activist family. That's such a beautiful, amazing picture. Did any of this come as a surprise to you where you are today, considered also one of the most influential black people in Britain? Any of it a surprise?
Wow. Okay.
We're going right in.
Yeah, we're going right in. That's an interesting question. Did I anticipate early in life that this is where I would be? No. That I can say no to. And I should go back and say thank you for having me.
Of course.
There's so many guests that you can have and so many interesting guests that you have had. So it's lovely of you to actually invite me. Thank you very much for doing that.
The honor is all mine. Trust me. I'm totally buzzing.
And I actually ran into the person who introduced us.
Jason Pinto.
Last weekend. We just happened to be over the bank holiday. We just happened to be at the same location having lunch. At the same location. So I got to run into him. He's one of my favorite people, and I'm glad that you've had time with a person like yourself who I think is actually changing the world, and that's an important thing. Yeah. Did I think early in life that I was going to be in the UK sitting here in a thing called podcasting?
As one of the most influential black people in Britain. Like, that's a big deal.
It's a deal. I didn't anticipate these sorts of things. I was raised with the idea that Do you like to read?
Of course.
There is a book, it's a strange book, but one of my favorite authors, John Irving, wrote a book called The Cider House Rules. It was adapted into a movie. Beautiful. And there is the character of Homer Wells, and then there is the character of a father-son dynamic in any case. The dynamic that I think is most interesting is that the father figure, who's actually a doctor, says to his adoptive kind of a son that you need to have a purpose. That it's important and in this situation, he runs an orphanage, and as an orphan, you need to have a purpose. And I think that from the very early stage, my family, and not just my family, but everything around me would have actually lent itself to that you need to find your purpose. It doesn't need to be the purpose that we think is right for you, but you had better have a purpose in this life. So a kind of a purpose-driven life has always been one of those things. And then you have to decide, what is that purpose going to be? Is it to make money? Is it a purpose to gain celebrity? Is it a purpose to save the world? And or to improve the world, not save the world, but improve the world. And if you're going to do that, how do you do it?
Yeah.
And what are the resources you need to draw upon for that in order for those things to happen? And so each of the things that as I listen to the list, because it's an interesting list, but it just means less that I'm impressive, but that I'm old.
Also impressive.
But old. But that list says to me that each one of those is an opportunity to have an impact and to make my life worth something and to have a purpose for being here, as opposed to just going through life, having at the end of the day, being able to say when my time is over, to say that there was a good reason that I walked among us, whoever I walked among. So that's true.
How did you find your purpose?
I think it was a bunch of external stimuli plus an internal drive. I read a lot when I was growing up.
Mm-hmm.
I was involved in community. I was involved in school. I was involved in a close-knit family. I was involved in church, all of which were opportunities to get involved and to say and to test out and to experiment. My parents were very big believers in experimentation. You know, you could experiment with anything in my family. But because my parents are also children of the 60s, right? So they are, in that situation, a
They're
bit
all
radical.
about the change and the experimentation and
please. And
seeing what's new.
And they hope that you do. And they're both educators. Yeah. So it's like they want you to think a little bit differently, do things a little bit differently. Don't live the life that I led. All of the places that I was sitting in and I was participating in relatively intense ways, because it wasn't as if I was an observer and looking from the sidelines, but actually getting in and getting my hands wet and my feet wet and my hands dirty. That helped me, I think, to come up with what is the purpose. And then over time, I could tweak it. But one thing that I would say is that the purpose has to be built on foundation. And that's the other thing, that all of those institutions help to create solid foundations, i.e. that I know how to read, or I know how to debate, or I know how to look at a business plan, or I know how to read a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Everything built, or I know how to be in a play and memorize my lines, or I know how to talk to a congregation of people in church, or I know how to go against race context and go into places where they're hostile and do something. So all of those were building blocks, and all of those, I think, were part of that purpose.
All of those also what it feels like you're trying to share with our communities and to pour into our communities.
I hope so.
So what you just spoke about is all amazing, fantabulous things. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it wasn't just a straightforward road, and it wasn't just easy. Mm-mm. Were there any moments that made you think if you were following the right path or doing the right thing? And how did you overcome that and navigate that?
Oh, I still have the wonder. There's so many temptations in the world, right? There's another television show, right? Mm-hmm. And there's another opportunity to actually go to a different event, some glamorous and glitzy space. Mm-hmm. And that is when I feel the temptation, but every temptation is not necessarily an opportunity. And that's when I find myself, when tempted, to try to say to myself, is this a temptation which is a good thing because it's expanding, it's experimentation, or is it just a distraction? And so many times that is a conversation about, are you doing the right thing? Because if it's so tempting, if you're satisfied and everything's great, then I don't know that temptation sort of jumps on you as frequently.
Right.
But if you continue to be tempted, something is being told to you. Something is actually coming forward as information that maybe you should listen a bit more closely to. And therefore, you might not be doing the right thing. And therefore, that's what happens to me. I get tempted all the time. And that temptation says to me, am I doing what I should do? Some specific examples would be, we are raising money for this fund. So as you said, I'm a venture capitalist, and we take money that is pooled from all sorts of institutional investors around the world. We put it into a pool, and we then allocate that based on our theory as to what should happen. So we have a hypothesis, and then we try and execute against that hypothesis with a strategy and then a plan. And it's hard work going out there and asking people for money, particularly in this economic environment. You're in technology, so you know how hard it is as a technologist to get money, and people are actually looking for you. But then people who stand in a sort of an interim position between the money source and the company, we're saying that we can actually do it better. Many people would say, no, we can do it ourselves. So this is not, and especially in an economic time period like this, and particularly based on performance that has happened over the last 12, 24, 36 months, people who are asset allocators might be rightly concerned with people like me saying that we can do it better than you. Then you get tempted when it gets hard and money's hard to come by, and it's difficult to persuade organizations and individuals in those organizations. Then you say, am I really doing the right thing? Because it should be easier. It should really be. And you can think about this with you and Dan. Sitting here and you're saying, shouldn't it be my turnout be easier? Shouldn't that leap be easier?
Shouldn't that leg be higher, much easier?
Yeah, shouldn't it? And I've been doing this for all these years, and it hasn't gotten easier, or it's different. And what does that say? And do I need to reconsider based on this information?
Yeah, and with that, shouldn't it be easier? There is that trope about nothing that's worth having comes easy, right? And that idea around, how do you realize the joy in it if you don't fight a little bit for it? And I can say, at least from even my dancing background and moving into my current operator background, all the things that were just a little bit like, come on. There were moments definitely where I was like, should I be pushing this hard? Is it that moment? And sometimes you decide it's time and you have to call it. But when it comes through and when it happens, when you make that perfect 32 fouettes, or you finally get that partnering down, or you get that system out and it works and everyone is happy and it solves the problem, like having a little bit of that pushback is sometimes makes it all the more sweet, I feel like, sometimes.
But you've been on the other side, right? You have been the ability to actually choose people and say, I don't believe that person makes this opportunity is right for them. And you've looked at a lot of people who had great turnouts and they didn't get the 32 fortes and what is it called? What is it? Fouettes in a row. And you say to yourself, that person's not going to necessarily make it. And for them, you are helping them to make a decision that there might be a better path for you. You might want to just think about acting. You might want to think about singing. Maybe dancing is not the place, because over time, if you're having this much difficulty,
that's so true.
It might not be worth it later on. Thank goodness you got
save
over
your
that.
body.
And save your body.
Don't do the pain on your body. So speaking about that, like your experience is in finding these organizations, finding these companies, normally at their nascent stages, and helping to develop them and help them grow. Have you ever come across a moment where you had to say to a company or a founder, I don't know if this is your journey? Have you ever had that?
We say it more nicely than this is not your journey, even though that's a pretty nice way of saying it. But no, all the time.
Really? How do you navigate that?
The kindest thing is to be honest with the person and to say, at least from your perspective, but then also to be humble enough to say, now look, the whole point of being an entrepreneur is you have to be a little crazy, right? Why would you do this unless it's a lot of hard work without a lot of tangible reward until somewhat later. There's a lot of speculation which is involved and a lot of sacrifice you're going to have to make. So if a person says that they want to do that and they've done it for a period of time and they come to me with an idea that I just don't think that's good, you're a disruptor. I've lived an experience. I've lived through my life. I think that I have, based on that, some advice to be able to give, and I think I have some insight that could be useful. And if I say I don't think that, as we say in my part of the world, that dog don't hunt, that I think you ought to listen to that. I also think that you should fight against that. You should fight against the tendency for other people to take you off your path. You hear so many stories, particularly among women and people of color. I had a guidance counselor who told me that I wasn't ready for school. Not me, but this is you've heard those stories. That you should really go into, instead of becoming an astronaut, you should go into
teaching.
Yeah, something else. And there's always, because you're so good at this, but you're not going to really make it. You can't be the head of the Church of England or the Bank of England or any of those things, because it's not for you. You just don't have what it takes, because that is someone else's determination. And if we listen to those, we'd all be sitting around in other spaces, and there would not be the disruption, and we would not be getting to Mars, and we wouldn't be doing other sorts of things. So in my opinion, it's very important that even though I say it, that's my opinion, and then good, I hope you prove me wrong, and I hope that I can say later on that I missed the opportunity to invest in one of the biggest things possible. Tragically.
Have you?
Not that frequently. That's the problem. You find out that you didn't miss the next Amazon. You didn't miss the next Google. You didn't miss the next BET. You didn't miss the next Tyler Studios. I didn't not see Anna DuVernay. None of that sort of stuff has been my experience. We have not found that there is a huge amount of oversight that happened.
So that also means that you are very good at what you do, with being able to spot the opportunity, support it, grow it. What do you think makes you so good?
And it's not me.
Well, your organization and your
organization, team. The team. There's a whole investment team, and they do lots and lots of work. And I think what makes them good is experience. And my experience is as an operating executive in companies like you, an operating exec. And so I have a set of and also being older means that I've had a series of economic cycles that I've gone through. And living in different countries and living and existing in different environments means that I then have, by contagion, I've learned a great deal in those sort of spaces. So I would say that those are the things which are extremely consequential and important and allow me to do pattern recognition and the pattern and then predict forward. And then that allows me to understand a certain number of things. Another thing is that we also talk to so many companies. One of the things that most people don't understand, most people who are coming to speak to me, they come with the idea that they're the only person, that they're the first person who's come up with this idea. And these are innovators, these are disruptors, and certainly there's a novel approach they have. But most of these ideas, you should assume that there's someone else, and someone else's, someplace else, who are actually trying to do the same thing, and that they are working harder, and that they are better financed, and they're smarter. So that kind of scare that constantly someone might be taking my idea and going forward, so much time is spent trying to protect the idea. I need you to sign a non-disclosure or this sort of thing, but not as much time is being spent. The competition, who I don't even know, they're in stealth mode. They're the ones who are going to eat my lunch. It's not this person who I think might steal an idea. The thing is that someone else is going to execute possibly better than I do, faster than I do, more well-funded than I am, better network than I am, and therefore gets to the punch much more quickly.
So one, I remember I spoke to you about an idea that I have, and this is partly why this podcast exists.
Oh, really?
Something that you said to me, and your suggestion, because my idea was so big, right? And we talked it through, and you actually didn't tell me it can't work. You were just like, this is the reality of what you're looking at, which is the truth. And then you said, but start with your customer base, start with your people.
Right.
What about a podcast that's talking to, and we talked about my dance background and that transition and working with that. And yes, at some point that is exactly where we'd go. But then you put the idea of doing a podcast in my head, and it kept on coming back to this. And this actually is because I decided I needed a fake project to reach out to people on LinkedIn, because I just feel it's icky to me, that networking, that cold connecting thing. I feel better when there's something for me to offer. I want to just talk to people, because the thing that interests me the most and why I am an operator and a generalist is I just like to really understand how things work and how we can make them better. I gain this knowledge and this information that then I can maybe tweak and twist. I was mentioning it to a friend, and he was like, that's a podcast. And I said, you know what? Eric Collins, he mentioned about podcasting me before. He said, nah. He said, because he gets it and he's right. And here we are. So also, thank you for that.
And I hope you're keeping yourself open. I can't take credit for that, because I'm sure somewhere in your head, after all, you've been much closer to the actualizing of an entertainment dynamic than I've ever been, right? You have actually been in shows. You've actually danced your way through things. So you've actually been in a creative endeavor that's made a huge amount of money, too. So the question for me of you saying that there's a portion of media that you could actually be absolutely expert in, and that from that expertise it would spin off and lead to other sorts of things. Well, that sounds like you. That sounds like your experience again. Maybe it hadn't been in the forefront because you had been focusing on. The other thing I find that many of us do is we focus so much on a particular answer to a particular problem. One of my professors from law school said that instead of having a pathway, which is sort of having a map that says go from point A to point Z, what I want people to think about is having a topographical map, that you know sort of what are the dangers, toils and snares that exist in the environment in which you're dropped, but that by knowing that, you then can choose the pathway that makes sense at the time, as opposed to only being able to follow that one pathway. So if we're so focused on the one path to the end, and that would be the bank, we can get to that. We can get to that a number of ways, because what are we really talking about in banking? What we really are talking about is having capital which is able to then be put to use in other sorts of spaces, whether it be through lending, or whether it be, i.e. credit, or debt, or whether it be done through equity, and the ability for people to then access that in order to then build on it, do other sorts of things, and then put money back into the system to then grow further. So if you're taking ideas like this, you're putting it out into the world, it is a bank of ideas, right? And the question of then what happens from there, and if you have a community that gets large enough and that community wishes to be active, how do you further activate them from being a passive listener in a broadcast sense and instead be an active participant? So I see this as being the foundation of a lot of things, and I think your background in operations, because you've run businesses, your background in creative, because you've been on the creative side and you have been on the business side of creative also, I think that's a fantastic baseline and a fantastic foundation for building this other sort of stuff.
Thank you, and now I'm blushing.
Oh, really?
Thank you. You just highlighted a different avenue. And even though innately I know that especially when I'm working with other people, or for other people actually, and that was the other thing. When I'm working for other people, that's the nature in which I think, but it's always very different when you're talking about yourself, right? And in a way, hearing it from someone that I respect so much, it just also gave me a little bit of permission. We don't need permission.
We don't need permission,
right? So you have this beautiful tapestry of everything that you feed in. And then you decided to write a book. We don't need permission. That's very helpful for particularly Black communities. It talks about, one, the tricks that we're missing, but also, two, how are we going to continue building this and moving forward. So when writing this book, where did you pull from to add to this book? What parts of your experience?
So decide to write a book is a bit of a misnomer, because sometimes things are thrust upon you.
Right.
And it's just the time. And for me, and at some point, can we come back to the conversation about the ickiness about networking?
Yes.
Because I do think...
Definitely.
I do want to talk about that and unpack it a little bit, because I do believe it's something that will create great opportunity. I think you're right to have a sort of a concern as to what value can add, but your presence alone is generally value enough in those sort of situations. The question of adding a supplemental is... I'm
happy to unpack that.
Okay, let's go back and we'll unpack that. But let's start... So in this question of why... So someone actually approached me. If you go all the way back, someone approached me to write a book. And the reason they approached me was very clear. At the time, my profile was relatively high because I had just signed this deal to do a television program. So the Moneymaker, Channel 4 is going to be, who knew when it was going to come on, but it was going to be a primetime show. It was at least something that they were going to be promoting. And when those sorts of things happen, other people see opportunity associated with that. So a publisher came to me and said, we think that this is something that you should do. Why don't you take the weekend to write an outline of what a book might actually be?
Right.
That's how it happened. And I then, in a panic, went to the publicist for Impact X, a woman named Eva Simpson, who has a company called ESPR, Eva Simpson PR. And she had been a writer. She'd actually been an editor. She's done a lot of things in her career. And in a panic, I was like, so what do I do about this? And she said, would it be beneficial for the mission? Is it a temptation or is it an opportunity, as we spoke about before? And I said, I think it could be an opportunity for Impact X. And this is happening during COVID. It's COVID, so I can exercise outside for an hour a day. I can watch as much Netflix as I want during the day, and YouTube. I love YouTube. And there are other things I can do. And so this television show was being produced, but it didn't take all my time. I had the investment company, and it was like, we are going to continue investing with the money that we have to invest, and we're going to manage our portfolio also. But I still have lots of extra time. I'm not going to dinners. I'm not traveling.
True.
I'm not going to Ghana for anything. I'm not going to Hawaii. I'm just going to be sitting in place. And so I was able over that weekend, because there was nothing I can do. And even I usually go to church on Sunday. You couldn't do that. You could go for an hour because they were video casting. But it's just like, all right, so I have a lot of time. So what shall I do? And so I wrote an outline, and the outline turned out to be what the book ended up being. And the outline being, it ended up being almost the introduction to the book and then the chapter headings.
Okay.
And I tried to, what I thought was that if I was going to write a book, it was certainly not going to be a memoir. There's nothing that interesting. When I say there's nothing that interesting, there's nothing that is so new in the Eric experience. And how many books are published in the UK every year? There are like 600,000 are published every year. And then there are all those titles that were published the year before and then the century before. So there are lots of books that are out there. And in the UK, 65 million books are purchased a year. That is about one book per person in the population, maybe even a little bit more if it's 61 million. So it's a little bit more than one book per person. That's a lot of books. So there's a lot of content out there. And so the question of what do you want to add to that? Do you add the equation of another young black man who grew up in the civil rights movement and who was in the United States and then moves to the UK and that kind of book? I'm not James Baldwin, right? So Letters from a Native Son, when he's writing from his self-imposed exile in Paris and writing about the United States, I'm not that good. And then I'm not not Ursula Burns, who wrote the book, Where You Are Is Not Who You Are. I haven't had that unicorn status where I've been the first black woman to run a Fortune 500 company and then to be able to talk about that and have gone from real poverty to whatever. I am not Booker T. Washington up from slavery, from slavery to the most well-known black person probably in the world at the time. I'm not going to write that book, right? None of those books are going to be written by Eric. So it's like, what could I actually do that is going to be something that actually means that I have satisfied a purpose. And so I said, I should be talking about business because of the businesses that I've run, and not like Chris Gardner in The Pursuit of Happiness in his life and business, but a life of a person who's been running businesses on behalf of many different stakeholders, made them a great deal of money, and is in the process now of trying to do that among a group of people who generally don't have that sort of capital and haven't had that sort of opportunity. And how do I make that into something which are some lessons and to things which I think are the most important pieces that might not otherwise be told to you. And that's where the network piece comes in. Because if we avoid the network, then we might avoid the lessons, even if they're hard lessons, even if they're somewhat nasty lessons, we might miss those, and therefore we don't necessarily have as much of a strong foundation as we could. In any case, that's how the book came about. And over the course of a weekend, I wrote. The publicist, Eva Simpson, helped to edit it into something that looked good. And then we turned it in, and the publisher liked it.
Because it's insightful, it's genuine, it's educational, it provides all those things. So it is, from my perspective, when I read it and having conversations with you and knowing you, it was like, you said it wasn't going to be a biography, but it's not a manifesto, but it is, for me, the sum of your experiences and your knowledge, all just sharing with people. And we will come to the network, but I want to ask you, thinking about all of those things that you contribute and you bring, when you're looking at organizations or founders or they've approached you, how do you determine, high level, which ones are going to, like you think, like you've invested in Marshmallow, which is unicorn, beautiful, amazing story, but also two brothers, twins, and all of that good stuff. And you've invested in organizations like Pace that's been acquired by Flyr. And as you said, you've seen successes. What makes you go, yeah, that's the one? What are the things you look at? And
so those are actually very different decisions, because when you look at a company like Marshmallow, so an insurtech company that was started here in the UK about 6 years or so ago, started by twins who had never been, identical twins, not just twins, identical twins, who had never been in the insurance industry, and they are coming up with an idea to disrupt the insurance industry, especially for expats who can't bring their driving record with them, and therefore when they apply on the Go Compare, these comparison sites, they end up paying 5 times what someone who has a driving record that is attached to their application. So these guys doing that, and with this kind of a market that had been underserved, I don't know if indeed we would have gotten there as a company had we not done additional research. The additional research had us, because we've decided that there was an opportunity in Europe and the UK to invest in fintech. And if you think about where you're investing, you want to invest in places where you are geographically and where you are from a business cycle perspective, it seems to make sense. If you're in the UK or if you're in Europe, 2 things make sense: fintech and health tech. Those are 2 places where we have a lot of good education, you have a lot of good research, you have a lot of learning, and if you're in fintech in particular, you have centuries of involvement in everything from insurance to banking. Yeah. So we made a decision as an organization. There's a young woman named Yvonne Pagella who helped to really lead this effort. She's a fantastic investor and part of our team. She said, I like insurance, and insurance is a good place for us to look. And so she looked at about 25 insurance companies. Oh. Yeah, we didn't just look at that one company. Right. Of those 25 insurance disruptors in Europe and the UK, 5 of them we started to do deep research on. So that's how we then got an idea. 2 of them, we then decided these are the 2 that we think, based on everything that we see happening in the market from a macro level, in terms of the idea that they have in particular to deal with the macro level dynamics of the marketplace. And then when we think about the team and others, and we think about the momentum that they have, these are the 2 companies. Then we spent 6 months in a charm offensive trying to get ourselves into the Marshmallow deal. It didn't just happen. So we had to spend 6 months of diligently pursuing them. They had already gotten all the subscribers that they need for their round that we got into in terms of the round of capital that they were raising. So that's an interesting sort of a question, and how we got into that. But it's very different than Pace, because Pace, we had in Pace a person who we had known intimately for a long time. So Jason Pinto's reputation precedes him. He was introduced to me by a venture capitalist. He, at the time, was a general partner in a venture capital firm.
Yes.
He had a company that he started when he was an undergrad that he had actually sold. He had been to MIT and studied physics, and then he got his graduate degree at Stanford. Then he got his PhD at University of Cambridge. And so here's a guy who he knows everything. So he knows everything about the way that the world works in terms of venture. So when you're backing him, no matter how great the idea is, he's so good. So you could back him personally in almost anything. And then he had with him a guy who was his co-founder who had just exited. One guy had just exited from iZettle. And so there was a guy who knew something obviously about and had been on the product side, I believe. And then you had a chief scientist who had actually come up with the technology that they were trying to then they were going to try and bring to market, prove, and then expand. And they were looking at the travel industry.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, the travel industry looked really good in 2019 when we decided to invest. And then there was COVID, right? And then it was the stupidest decision we made, right? It was one of those companies that was like, wait a second, no one can travel.
And no one could have seen that coming.
And no one could have seen this coming. And no one could have stayed in this hotel. So all of a sudden, you're going from, this is the best entrepreneur in the world and the best possible. And we've mitigated all of our risk. It's just perfect, too. Oh, yeah. You've just got the rug pulled out from under you. And then it's a question of, and then what do you do?
Yeah.
And that's where we saw these people's mettle. That's when we saw that team. And that's when we saw what Jason Pinto was made out of, and that's what we were betting on. That is a person who could pivot. Yes. And he could say, we can figure out a way to reduce our burn, meaning the amount of money that we're spending on a monthly basis, the amount of cash that's going out the door. We can figure out a way to actually do a bit more science and a bit more learning about the product in the interim. We can find a way, because we know that the world will open up again, we can predict the future, and we can keep you informed along the way so that you don't get lost, investor, because you're so far away from this market, and you don't get discouraged and disheartened. And in fact, during COVID, we put more money into the company.
No way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is what a great entrepreneur can do, because that great entrepreneur has the experience. It's like a great football player or a great dancer. It's not as though your performance goes well every night. Something goes wrong. If you're experienced, then you can figure out what to do. Do we need to pull that person off because they've actually sprained their ankle and they're not going to be able to do the jump 2 scenes from now? Or do we need to actually adjust the choreography? Do whatever. You pivot. We've got to pivot there. So those are 2 different examples, but that's how, so there's no real one way to find a fantastic entrepreneur, and those characteristics are somewhat different. The first people had a big idea. The second people had a big idea too. The first people were in novel space that need to be disrupted, and we knew that was going to happen. And then the second group was like, look, this is such a good team. You have to back them.
Yeah.
Such a good team.
Wow. Because I don't want us to miss the network part, because you have mentioned network to me before as well. You've always encouraged me to reach out to my network.
Absolutely.
You've also said for you, your network is very important. And obviously with what you do, your network is important. Critical. For a lot of people, networking is icky. It feels uncomfortable. We all know at the end of the day that it's necessary. It's necessary in the way we live. It's how we live as well. It's community in a way. For someone like me who finds networking very difficult, I'm fine once I'm introduced to someone, then we can get the ball rolling. And if I wanted to reach out to you as someone you don't know, what feels good to you? What feels right to you? What works?
I'm going to answer that. I'm going to answer it somewhat backward, because I do think that what you state as a concern about networking is legitimate. I wouldn't say it's illegitimate at all. The entrepreneur who cold calls in sometimes is a person who gets attention, but there are many organizations who will not actually take any cold call, and it actually is a mark on the negative that you've done that you've been so audacious, that you've come this way. And I think the reason being is that it's so easy these days for you to find some way in which you're connected. And that's the investigation which needs to happen. And the reason being is, it's not just because you need an introduction. The other reason is you need back channel. Networking is not just meeting the individual and then making sure that they understand what it is that they can do for you. But after you've had that conversation, you need to know where that person's mind is and where what that person is thinking, because it is very rarely, I never have this experience where someone sees me or someone talks to me and then someone says, wow, he is just that fabulous that we're going to put money behind him. That's what I'm always looking for. I'm always looking for money from organizations, institutions, or individuals.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I know that I need to have additional conversations that go on. After I've met you, that's only the first step. It's all the other sort of stuff. For you to be concerned about cold calling is legitimate. I don't want to do that either. That's a last resort. The first resort is to figure out within the people who you know, the people who trust, the people who are going to say good things about you. And you know, those circles, the circle is, there's a very tight circle, and then it might get more and more amorphous as it goes away. And we hope we don't have to go all the way out to the people who barely know us at all, our play cousin. What we really want to do is to try and say that there are enough people who have enough connection, who are close to me, and who have active knowledge and will actually vouch for me. That introduction will be very different. And I want that person who would, and who understands why it would be very useful, and that I would appreciate it, and that I actually am in a quid pro quo situation, then I would do the same thing for them. That's what I really want to see. I want people to think about networking as a it's not multi-headed. It's just, there are many stops along the way to networking. It's not just the initial introduction. It's all the other sort of stuff. So yeah, please. But if you don't network, this is the problem. If we don't expand, and I say this all the time to other investors, that you have such a demographic bias. Your demographic bias is driven by because you can only see as far as your nose. And beyond that, it's just unknown to you. And therefore, it's somewhat less legitimate. It's somewhat less interesting, less worthy. The opportunities are too risky. So in my opinion, the reason that you continue to have a portfolio of companies that are run by white men who went to Oxbridge or went to Yale, Harvard, or whatever it is because those are your search images, and your search images are driven by the network in which you inhabit. So if we allow those sorts of folks to always exist within a comfortable network and never reach outside, and we do the same sorts of things, very rarely do those two meet, and therefore, lightning. I was watching a television show last night, and they said thunder. It's like the two of you. It's like thunder meeting lightning. If we can get those two things together, sometimes thunder can actually meet lightning. I was watching this about Shirley Chisholm, the first black woman in the U.S. to be a congressperson.
The new one, the Regina King
Regina King one. And that's one of the lines that's said by Diane Carroll.
One of my college roommates.
Are you serious?
Amira Van. Yeah.
Really? Oh my God, she is just fantastic. I didn't know that. I first saw her though in How to Get Away with Murder.
And she was in Underground. Did you see Underground?
Oh, I did see Underground.
Yeah, that was the breakout one, Underground.
Oh my God, Underground.
Amira, we went to Fordham together, and we lived together for all 4 years.
And so you both knew that you were going to go in?
She studied theatre because Fordham actually has a really strong theatre program.
Of course.
And I was in the inaugural class for the Ailey Fordham BFA program. So we both knew that we were going to go into those directions.
So can I say another thing about networking then? So this is what I find interesting, because I'm always fascinated when I see people of color, particularly women whose parents and the family and the infrastructure around them allows them, and I say allows, I use that word deliberately, to participate in creative. And you're actually allowed to study those sorts of things. You didn't have to study. Your parents didn't make you study banking. They didn't make you go to medical school.
Nope. That's interesting. Fantastic. So the only condition, my father was like, I need you to get a real tertiary education. You can dance, but no, to Juilliard, it's a conservatory degree. I want you to engage with people, because he was thinking about the network, clearly. I want you to engage with people who are going to be doing different things in the world, not necessarily only in the arts. And he said, I want you to have a degree that's going to challenge you. So make you realize if you like school or not. Yeah. And so I was like, but Dad, scholarship, Juilliard, what?
Wow.
I was like, come on, dude.
Nina Simone.
Hello.
There are a lot of us who've gone there.
Right?
Viola.
An African father, Ghanaian father. He was like, yes, I appreciate that, Abba, but I think we should find an option. Yeah. And conveniently, Ailey Fordham BFA program came up. So I was in the inaugural class. Yeah. And he was like, yes, Fordham University, that's a school. Yeah. You're going to get a degree and you're going to be challenged, all of that. And that's how that happened. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Beyond the people that I've met and the people that I'm very close to still now in those relationships, training, topping off all of my amazing training in the Caribbean with the Ailey School training, couldn't ask for anything better. going to Fordham, which then made me realize I do like school.
Yeah.
And I came out with a double major, got also a BA in history. That's what I was like, yeah, do an MBA, I can do that. So all of these other things, but the exposure and being able to be in a school that has such a great history, but also the location. I was at the Lincoln Center campus.
Yeah,
even the dorms in those days, we were living in 3-bedroom apartments with kitchens. It was amazing. It was such an experience. But yeah, that was the only thing that they ever said when it came to dancing. I got put in dancing because my sister started dancing. And Big Sister, I wanted to follow Big Sister.
Of course.
And then when it became clear that it was a thing that I could do, the piano, the tennis, the everything else dropped away. And I started focusing on dance really early and really young and doing the RAD and started traveling and dancing and stuff. But they never put limitations. And it was kind of like, my mother's like, well, I always wanted to be a dancer when I was young, so why not let you do it? And if you could keep going. And my sister's actually a playwright and an author and an editor. I turned into the more business-focused person eventually, but yeah, and my dad is a dental surgeon and my mother's a flight attendant. So they're not even in the creative spaces, but they were just like, if that's what you want to do, go ahead and do it. And my dad he wasn't really into the dance part, but he was the supportive. And I'll never forget, I had gone away to university and came back home. We were doing a show and I did a solo by David Bayer, a Trinidadian choreographer. And my dad actually came to the show. He'd stopped coming to the shows a long time ago. And he actually came because he hadn't seen me dance in a while. And he went, oh, now I know what all the fuss is about.
Oh, so you had a revelation.
Oh, my God. But yeah, the parents just let us do what we wanted to do. And all they did was support. They just let me thrive.
The thing I like about that is your parents invested. I think your parents were invested. And this is part of why I really talk about the book, that you invest early in people. I don't believe that young people, and I wonder if I believe this. Hold on, let me think. Do you have to, if a person has not been exposed to something early on, particularly if you're talking about something which involves technique, that trying to pick up technique late
is difficult.
And to undo the other. I believe in technique. I believe in everything, including education, that there are some things, reading a spreadsheet, it's merely a technique, right? It's a story about the operations of an organization which allow you to understand. It is not brain science, but that one of the things that or it's not dental surgery, but what you should be doing is to understand the technique of creating a story which is able to be understood numerically. And that kind of a discipline, just like your ability to breathe effectively so you can actually make it through a 2-hour performance with a 15-minute interval and dancing full out night after night with the same choreography. It's like those sorts of things, that technique is the thing which will carry you. It's like the muscle memory. And I do believe that it's very important, and I find it strange that people balk at the idea. It's like why you go into a internet company or a fast growth technology digital company and you stay there is because you're learning a technique. You're learning a language. You're learning an approach. Trying to persuade people that you are going to be a credible steward of their capital if you don't necessarily understand the language of and the technique of. That's a hard thing to do. Now, there are people who are just brilliant, and that brilliance will outshine anything else, but I think that is a very small part. And so I think the technique is the thing which is a good foundation stone. As you hear, I say foundation all the time, and I think it's the thing which gives longevity.
I agree with you on that. And that's the thing that I've been building in my corporate career after the dance career. And the technique was, I was one of those dancers as well. If we don't have the technique, you can't lay on top of that. You can't actually be a brilliant performer without the technique, because your technique is that foundation that's going to get you through when you have nothing left in the tank.
Right.
And that's the thing that you will rely on. It's the thing that's going to keep you safe and uninjured and all of those things. And I think as businesses grow and they continue to develop, it's understanding that foundation, but being able to build a foundation, which is your operations, but one that is also built with a creativity and a flexibility in mind to be able to adjust to global pandemics or whatever else that may be. Because you look at broad things like this, AI that's taking over the world and is now in daily headlines and is, the everyday. There is big disruptors in medical coming. There's new technologies with brain scans and breast scans. But you get exposed to so many different things that are coming with disruptors. Is there anything currently that's really interesting you and capturing?
So I believe that one of the most exciting experiences that people of our world are going to have is this idea of taking what is the human mind and helping a mechanical or a digital mind to assist us in specific ways. So artificial intelligence, that artificial creation of intelligence using real data, using synthetic data, all sorts of things. But I also think there's some other very exciting prospects. But the funny thing is, for me, I have been running artificial intelligence companies since probably 2002.
They've been around.
They've been around.
They've just not been in the everyday life.
The one thing that has been is where I started, though, and it's fortunate for me. If you are on your phone, or if anyone that's listening to this podcast is on their phone, and you actually are spelling out a word, no matter what you're doing, and it predicts the word, that's artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And it is consumer-driven artificial intelligence, that prediction. And it's using natural language processing in order to be able to do that. And that's a subset of artificial intelligence, as is computer vision, as is machine learning. All those are parts of artificial intelligence. And then you hear about large language models and other sorts of things. So I would say I think I've been in this world for a while. And in fact, the last 4 companies that I ran before I became a venture capitalist all leveraged artificial intelligence. It was just a given. And now it is used not only just as a given, but also in some ways a gimmick. So we also have to talk about the way in which some of the artificial intelligence is just hype as opposed to necessarily adding. But when you put something like artificial intelligence and add it to the equation of healthcare, and that we're able to diagnostically get through more scans so that people can, and we're more likely, as opposed to with the world of human error, we're likely to see what is actually there and identify that there's a cause for concern. All of that to me is extremely exciting. It saves lives, it saves money, it makes things available, it gives us more access. I think about artificial intelligence in terms of the finance. I think of artificial intelligence in terms of performance of athletes and the like. All of the things which can actually be used to then drive. And one of the things that worries me, it has always worried me, is artificial intelligence. But I was encouraged to go into fields where I think artificial intelligence will be a great disruptor relatively quickly, especially for young people early on in their careers.
What fields are those?
Those are fields like law, accounting, even medicine.
Yep.
Many of these places are, especially the early years, are spent trying to acquire information through an apprenticeship program. And apprenticeship models are one person or many people. And those sort of models, they don't scale very well, and they're ripe for disruption. And so the question of but artificial intelligence, which if you had a digital brain that never wants to have a vacation. They don't think about vacation. They just want to get it right. They don't have the situation of the baby was up all night. They didn't have an argument with the spouse. They didn't go to the bachelor party. And all of those things which impede, they don't have any of those impairments. And it's just, and they don't ask for salary increases. They just continue to do, all they want to do is to get it right.
It just keeps learning.
And so that, in my opinion, is where I'm both pleased but then concerned, because again, getting it right and getting it right for women, people of color, because those are jobs that have helped us to enter the middle class, sometimes the upper middle class. And those are some of the things which will be disrupted first and most.
Wow. Eric, so much. I'm like beaming because it's been such a great conversation, but I also am very aware that you are a man who has things that needs to be done, and we want you to do those things because these companies need you. Our community needs you to keep going. But I have a closing tradition.
Yes, please.
Inside the Actors Studio, that program that was with James Lipton. So James Lipton always ended every interview with specific 10 questions that I've always found just really insightful, but engaging. So I would like to take you through those questions. So
I look forward to it.
First question, what's your favorite word?
Infinity.
Ooh. Of course.
Of course.
Yes.
Of course, yeah.
And what's your least favorite word?
No.
Why no specifically? Because some people say it's their favorite word, right?
Oh, the reason that no, it's so final. If I would say maybe not that, but if we did it this way, that's what I'd like to hear.
Yeah.
I'd like to see some creativity.
You like some
I'd love
improv.
that. Yeah.
A no and or a yes but.
If you say but, then it means everything before it was negated. But
And what turns you on?
oof, what turns me on? I actually both love people and am scared of people. So people,
Feel that.
I love people. I love being in the world, but people also scare me. It's not for the reasons that there are people who are crazy out there. It's more that there are ways that I haven't even thought about living, ways that I haven't even thought about thinking. And it can be very exciting, but then it can also be very intimidating.
Yeah.
So even with me, I'm a venture capitalist. That's what I want. It can
Yeah.
still be very intimidating.
I agree with you. When I think of the scope of humanity, you just go, oh my gosh, it's actually just too big to compute and understand. And what turns you off?
Self-centeredness really turns me off. And it can be expressed in a variety of ways, but those sorts of manner in which individuals must take all the time. There's not a lot of giving. That is such a turnoff.
And you are a very giving person. What sound or noise do you love?
Snoring. No, I do like to sleep. Let me think. What is a sound that I actually do love? Do you know, I really do love the sound of rain on the street. Not even on the house, but on the street in the UK. And I like hearing the sound of cars driving slowly through the rain and sort of the splash of rain on tires.
Oh my gosh. So that's one of my favorite things about living in London. I always like the rain, and I love, like, my flat has a balcony, and it's perfect for when it rains because I can sit outside on the balcony, and I just love how it sounds.
I love that sound.
It's such a good sound. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And what about one that you hate, a sound or a noise that you hate?
What's a sound that really bothers me? You know what's it's not even a sound, it's just a sensation. I do not like flesh against rough surfaces. Meaning, so if I watch someone skateboard, for instance, I'm watching someone skateboard and they fall, and that you're getting ready to see that impact with the asphalt, even if they're very good and they can roll in that sort, I just don't like that. I don't like that sound. That sort of sound just creeps me out.
Interesting. And your favorite curse word? If you're not a cursing person, feel free to pass by, but what's your favorite curse word?
My favorite curse word, what do I really, which is, it sort of embodies everything. It's like, you know, a word that really embodies everything. It's like shit.
And you can say it in so many variations.
You really can. It's that is the, which means it's good. It means, this is really going really badly. It's I think that's a good one. I actually do like that one.
If you weren't doing what you do now, what is a profession that you would like to do?
I would actually love, I think I would love this. I think I would love to do a kind of a talk show, but it would be more sort of issues oriented, and it would allow me to meet people. It would allow me to interact, because I much prefer to ask questions and to answer questions. But I would really like to do that.
You also have the perfect voice for it.
Oh, you think?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, and a face for radio. I like that. I like that.
No, yes, people out there, Eric needs his own show.
Oh,
let's make it happen.
But not like yours. Yours is good. I like this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And one that you wouldn't want to do, another profession that you wouldn't want to do.
Today, I went to the NHS because I had a pain in my shoulder that I've had for a while. That's something I would not want to do. Working with people who are in distress, and real distress, where you have to sometimes make these hard decisions about will you or won't you? Can we actually give you services or not? I think that would be very hard. And my older brother is a surgeon. He's not just a surgeon, he's a transplant surgeon.
Oh, wow.
So these are, and when I talk to him, and he's been doing it for 30 years, the whole idea of how am I going to be able to make a decision. But he told me that he has some patients that he's had for 30 years, his entire career, they're still living. But then there are those who have the transplantation just doesn't help to, it helps to elongate their lives somewhat.
Thank you to your brother as well. The
It's
final question, if heaven exists and whoever meets you at the pearly gates, what do you hope they will say?
I would hope they would say, job well done, Eric. Take your rest.
I'm pretty sure that's what they're going to say.
I don't know, but we'll see. We will
sure.
see.
Eric Collins, thank you so much. Bucket list checked. It's been a real pleasure, and I thank you
you
so much. And thank you to our listeners, and we'll see you soon. Take care. That's all, folks, for today's episode of I Do What I Do. Biggest thank you to you for listening, and to my guests for sharing their journey. I am Zara Bartels, and a super duper special shout out to the incredible folks that supported me on this creation. Keegan Simon, individual, for my logo and social graphics. Nikolai Labari for my theme music, and Andres Albert for being there and doing all the things while we recorded at TYX Studios in King's Cross, London. Walk good, keep doing what you do. Until next time.